All right, what is good, all you cool cats and kittens? This is your Commissioner Tim with the Week 7 recap. Apologies for the format in advance. I'm getting married this weekend, and I've been quite busy, but I'm trying to get this recap and power rankings coming out all today. So I'm having to do this format. We're going to do it live. So starting off, Week 7 is officially in the books. We are now officially halfway done with the regular season, boys. Week 7 was also sort of the same of how we've seen the last 4 weeks have now gone for our league, with most, sometimes all of our matchups having been decided really by that Sunday morning games. We did have a close one down to the last drive in our only matchup that was really between the playoff seeding favorites between Bills Mafia and Cup to Canada. And also trust the process with back-to-back league leading scoring over 158 points against Ben. The playoff race is tighter than it was actually expected to just a couple weeks ago. Now we got two teams just a game behind the 4 seed, being held by Bills Mafia after his close loss to Cup to Canada. I'm going to start out with fantasy notable positives. Cooper Kupp is our fantasy leader again for Week 8. Dude's on fire. His floor through the 7 weeks in the season so far, through the 7 games through the season so far, he has not had a bye yet. His floor is 8.9 points. And that really came against that weird blowout loss that the Chargers had against the Cardinals in Week 4, where Justin Herbert looked lost, the entire offense looked lost, Eckler wasn't able to get anything going. But even including that, Cooper Kupp is now averaging 23.2 points with this week, with multiple 30-plus point sort of league-winning, matchup-winning scoring outputs. And he's done tremendously to keep Ben in playoff contention, even while Christian McCaffrey has been injured. And I mentioned this a few weeks back, but on Kupp, he's still on pace to break the all-time season receiving record held by Calvin Johnson. And he's on pace to tie his mark right now at 1,964 yards. And also given it's 17 seasons, but even if it was a regular 16-game pace, Kupp is still on pace to finish as the 3rd best, in line with Jerry Rice's record from 1995. And Kupp is still on pace, by the way. This is what I mentioned a couple weeks ago. He is still on pace to have the highest scoring season in terms of fantasy output as a receiver in the entire history of fantasy football, even on a 16-game pace. So this is certainly a boon for Ben. What a great player to have on the roster. And it'll be interesting to see, what happens with Ben. If he stays in contention, he's obviously going to keep on to him. If he doesn't, drops out, what happens with Kupp? Because he's as top tier as you can get in any sort of receiver or any positional player right now within fantasy. All right, so Jamar Chase is a second player I want to highlight. He's actually, not only did he finish this week as the receiver 2 right behind Kupp, but he's also the wide receiver 2 for the entire season so far. This kid's is electric. I mean, Ryan absolutely nailed this pick. I've been trying to overpay to bring Jamar Chase onto my roster, but there's not a set of dudes, set of souls, set of draft picks I can send over to convince Ryan to let go of Jamar. I don't blame him. I mean, Jamar looks like he should be dynasty receiver 1. He's probably going to be a top 3 receiver in fantasy football for years to come as well. I mean, this dude is a rookie. Mike Evans, third player I want to highlight. Mike Evans had another one of his blow-up weeks, who almost gave Bills Mafia the upset victory over Cup to Canada, scoring 28 points with 3 touchdowns. And another receiver on Bills Mafia I want to highlight is A.J. Brown, AJB. Bills Mafia has been staying patient with A.J. Brown all season, and it finally looks like he's back. Scored over 23 points and looked like his dominant self in Week 7. AJB, for me, is a top 5 wide receiver for the rest of the season. A few mentions on other receivers. Terry McLaurin bounced back after a back-to-back down weeks, and he scored over 21 points for this week. Same thing goes for Chris Godwin, who had 3 sort of down-ish weeks back-to-back, and has scored another 21 sort of points coming into the season as well. Michael Pittman Jr. looks like he's having his breakout season as the Colts' deep threat. Scored over 18 points in that rainy, weird offense, but Carson Wentz looks like he's able to target Pitts downfield. And Michael Pittman is having his breakout season, man. He's a receiver 20 for the season. Over to running backs, Alvin Kamara leads the running back core, scoring over almost 29 points, and he looks like the offense for the entire Saints. And I have to imagine once Michael Thomas is back in week 9, it actually probably helps increase Kamara by increasing his floor as well. So a lot to expect for Kamara. I mean, I think with all the injuries in CMC, Saquon Barkley's, I think Kamara top 2, top 3 running back for the rest of the season. DeAndre Swift busts out over 25 points now, sitting at RB2 for the season. I mean, Dan Campbell is trusting in his sophomore superstar more and more, and he's averaged over 20 touches in the last 2 weeks and has been increasing his snap count as well as he continues to slowly sort of recover from his preseason groin injury that's still been sort of hampering and nagging him to date. And he's taking snap shares away from Jamal Williams, who sort of started out that season as 50-50 sort of splits. And that now feels like it's long and gone now. Damian Harris goes back-to-back weeks over 100 yards rushing on the ground and 2 touchdowns. Absolute steal for Ryan. I think he picked him up the 12th round draft pick, and he's now sitting at RB16 for the season. Players like Elijah Mitchell, Jonathan Taylor, Lenny Fournette all played really well and posted RB1 quality, so top 10, top 12 type of numbers for week 7. But I do want to mention Khalil Herbert specifically, another gigantic performance by the 6th round draft pick. I mentioned him, last week as well. He's clearly made Damian Williams irrelevant for that Bears offense. And I just saw Adam dropping him in our league after spending $80 on Fab on picking him up, I think in week 7. But with David Montgomery for another week, maybe more, they're not being very, straight with their expected timeline return for David Monty. But it continues, whatever time David Monty continues to miss, it continues to give Khalil Herbert the chance to really solidify his position on that backfield. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when Monty, when he's back, especially with Khalil showing up like this. I know Eves is very nervous, seeing Khalil break out, and how the snap shares really get affected once Monty is back. This could actually have quite a bit of massive implications for Eves and his run for the chip this year, because David Monty is his RB2 right behind Aaron Jones. Last running back I'll mention is Dearness Johnson on that Thursday night football matchup, who scored over 23.8 points. I mean, Cinderella story, was basically out fishing in the Key West before getting into the I think the American Football Association or whatever that was, before it went defunct. Basically had struggled to even find himself on a roster there. And then opportunity comes with both Chubb and Kareem Hunt out and really shows up. I love stories like this in fantasy football and NFL generally. It's just been really great to see. That said, I mean, he's had another week like this last season when he filled them for the injured Nick Chubb last season. But to be fair, Chubb is coming back this week, and likely he's just going to be a really strong handcuff for half Chubb now that he's made the trade to acquire for Dearness Johnson. Now that Nick Chubb is expected to be back this upcoming week. In terms of the quarterbacks, I'll mention 3 quick names before highlighting my last player who's not a quarterback. Matt Stafford looks like an elite quarterback. I think he's now QB6 for the season, and that's where I have him for the rest of the season ranking as well. Great elite production that the Washington Fantasy Football Team is able to get with a 9th round draft pick. Stafford should be able to stay elite for many more years to come, especially on that Rams offense. I mean, Sean McVay is running that offense to the T. They got tremendous amount of weapons that Matt Stafford couldn't have dreamed of on the Lions, especially after Megatron sort of ended up retiring. But he's loaded, and Matt Stafford is showing that he's an elite quarterback. And when you surround him with talent around him, really gets the best out of Matt Stafford. Second player quickly that I'll mention is Joe Burrow, another player for the Washington Fantasy Football Team. He's breaking out. He looked better through his rookie seasons. He's looked good through the rookie seasons, the 11 games last season before his knee injury. And he looked better than any other rookie quarterbacks that we're seeing this year, who was probably more hyped up in terms of Trey Lance, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson. But he came back. Joe Burrow came back this season healthy, and he's had a little bit of a slow start to the season, but he really broke out this week with career highs in 416 yards, scoring over 26 points fantasy wise. Tua Tagovailoa, I don't know if he's auditioning for other teams right now, or he's just pissed that the Dolphins are looking to trade for Deshaun Watson, but especially in his sophomore year after he gets picked in the 1st round draft pick. But back-to-back QB1 numbers, right after the injury, he's been back 2 weeks now and scored over 26 points this past week on efficient throwing now with 4 touchdowns. Okay, so that's all for the quarterbacks and all the other skill players. The last player I actually want to highlight here is really the rookie sensation tight end, Kyle Pitts. Back-to-back weeks of 100+ yards of receiving, and he just looks like this gigantic wide receiver in a tight end position. And that's why, Adam drafted him, right? He was going to get the wide receiver one type of upside numbers in a tight end. They're not asking him to really defend. The Atlanta offense is really just using him as a receiver, really. And he's had the benefit of having, Kyle Pitts has had the benefit of having the softest tight end matchups to begin his career. He's faced 6 of the bottom half teams in terms of defending tight ends, but the talent and production is all there. He's currently, I want to say, just the tight end 7, just because of how ridiculously talented this guy is. But that's really largely due to him only having one tight end for the season, one touchdown for the entire season so far. If he had 3 more or 4 more, right, that's not ridiculous to think about. A guy like Kyle Pitts and the target shares that he's able to command on offense. If he had just 3 more, he'd actually be sitting at tight end 3 for the season. So if you actually factor in, his just receiving yards, he's tight end 3 in receiving yards, only in total receiving yards, only behind Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. And in fact, if you factor in Pitts' bye week, he's only behind Mark Andrews in terms of pure receiving yards per game. So his tight end touchdown numbers will start to regress to the norm positively. And I've got Kyle Pitts as tight end 3, tight end 4 for the rest of the season. All right, fantasy notable negatives. We thankfully didn't have any major injuries like we've had to start the season, but that doesn't mean that there weren't any injuries, nor that there aren't any notable negatives. So I'll start with the notable negatives. And Justin Fields and Zach Wilson just look lost on offense, I think, for 2 different reasons. I'll start with just Justin Fields. And Zach Wilson, obviously, he's injured, so I'll sort of skip the commentary on him. But Matt Nagy is one of the worst NFL head coaches still with the job. And the play calling is disallowing Fields from being able to do anything. He took 10 sacks in week 7, and making it 22 sacks for the entire season to date, league leading by a large margin. I think he gets sacked on something like 14% of his dropbacks, and no other quarterback in the league has eclipsed 10%. So that's incredibly bad to be the top of the league in. But according to Pro Fantasy Football, only 18% of his sacks have actually been due to Justin Fields holding onto the ball for too long. And that's been sort of I think the unfair, to me personally, I think the unfair knock on him coming into the season, that he just held onto the ball too long. But, most of the fault really has been due to the O-line. That O-line on that Bears offense is just looking tremendously horrible. And we've seen way too many times what happens with, high-rated QB prospects who take too many sacks during rookie season. I mean, there's a lot, but obviously David Carr sort of comes to mind as well. And I think one of our managers said this, moving over to another quarterback, but Pat Mahomes looks like he's sort of switched bodies with Jared Goff last week. Pat Mahomes, while still quarterback 4 for the season, so obviously you're not mad about it if you really think about it from an absolute value, but relatively, you don't expect Mahomes to even eclipse or get below a QB2 territory unless someone's really going off like what Lamar was able to do back in 2019. But, clearly sort of that entire offense and defense in Kansas City just has a lot of things to be figured out. And, that Kansas City team entirely just has a lot of things to figure out if they're even going to make playoffs in the NFL. So, but thankfully for Cup to Canada, Mahomes did clear concussion protocol pretty quickly, which probably means that he didn't have concussion. So he's going to be expected to play this week after taking a pretty bad knee to the helmet. It looked pretty bad. He had to be helped off the field, but he's due for a big bounce back week because he's facing the Giants in week 8. And they're probably as soft as possible that you can get for opposing quarterbacks. Miles Sanders was ruled out mid-game with an ankle injury and is now week to week. They're not being, very clear about when he's expected to come back, but when teams say week to week, maybe you can, expect at least this week that he'll be missing and maybe potentially up to 2 to 3 or 4, like in the case of what we've seen with Saquon Barkley, for example. Josh Jacobs was also ruled out mid-game, this time with a chest injury. This guy's sort of been unlucky with a lot of the injuries this season to date. I think he's already missed 3 games so far, or 2 games so far. Reports are that it's a chest contusion, and the Raiders are thankful that apparently Jacobs did avoid a major injury, but week 8 is thankfully a bye week for the Raiders, so it should give Jacobs some optimal time to recover and come back for a Cup to Canada and finish out the season strong. Sorry, that's all for notable players from week 7. Now over to the matchup recaps. This was a to Cup to Canada 121. It really came down to the last drive where a touchdown in either direction really could have helped sealed it for either team. It really just came down to Alex Collins for Bills Mafia and James Winston for Cup to Canada on Monday Night Football as the decider. It was just one-on-one for them. And while Collins finished with 16 points or 16 carries, he also was missing a majority of the second quarter and ceded touches to Rashad Penny all throughout that second quarter, I believe, and gave up 6 carries. And perhaps it was that Alex Collins also came into the week a little banged up, but maybe those additional carries that he sort of ceded in second quarter could have been the potential deciding, decision factor that could have sort of swung the matchup over to Bills Mafia. But, we knew this coming into this week that one of these two teams, these two playoff favorite teams between Bills Mafia and Cup to Canada, was going to leave the week sitting at 4-3. Now it's just a playoff race with two teams right behind Bills Mafia, just a game back, sitting at 3-4. Bills Mafia now faces Half Chubb this week through, though, with basically all of his fantasy starters back from buys. I am predicting Bills Mafia to have a league high total for this upcoming week and get right back up to 5-3. Bills Mafia is now starting the softest part of his schedule, facing Half Chubb, then Ben, then Choda for the next 3 weeks. I think it's very possible that he pulls off 3 straight. And if so, Bills Mafia should be a lock for playoffs, as he should be sitting, and I believe, if I do my math right, he should be sitting at 8-3 after that. So Cup to Canada sneaks out a victory here in this matchup and also almost cost him $6, his $6 bet to go 6 straight. I know Yves was sweating this one out. He's got a tough matchup against Brady's third dynasty this week, who's also sitting at 5-2, but that should be largely irrelevant from a playoff seeding, given how far separate these two teams are from the 4th seed at the moment, and also how strong their rosters are compared to sort of the challenging rosters that are sitting at 5th and 6th right now. Again, I've got the 4th seed cut line at 8-6. Both of these teams should be able to get to their 8th win, I believe, and thus making the playoff probably in the next 4 weeks maximum. So matchup 2, Half Chubb at 101 versus Brady's third dynasty at 155. Brady's third dynasty takes an easy win here over the struggling Half Chubb. Half Chubb is now firmly making moves to build for the future. I can see him making moves to accrue promising draft picks and prospects, promising prospects and draft picks from the playoff contenders as we sort of head towards this trade deadline coming up in week 12. And Brady's third dynasty is now sitting at 5-2. He may also have Deshaun Watson coming into picture soon, especially if he ends up heading over to Miami. I think this is going to be a massive boon for Ryan in terms of what it may actually mean for his roster strength heading into the latter part of the season and playoffs. British Third Dynasty is certainly a playoff seeding favorite, in my opinion, but he's also the manager that will either be shaped by others or shape the rest of the league in terms of playoff seeding for the rest of the seasons, because he's going to face a tough matchup in Cup to Canada this week, followed by the Washington Fantasy Football Team, and then trust the process. It's within the realm of possibilities that Ryan potentially goes 1-2 over the next 3 weeks, where he cements Cup to Canada and the Washington Fantasy Football Team as playoff seed favorites, while dropping to the 4th seed race for himself, especially if he loses to trust the process potentially. But he can easily flip this and go 2-1, which I believe will cement Ryan as a playoff sort of lock after these next 3 weeks as well. Over to matchup 3, I got Choda at 132 versus the Washington Fantasy Football at 157. This one almost got away from the Washington Fantasy Football Team when early Monday Night Football, when DK Metcalf went off for a massive 84-yard reception touchdown to start Monday Night Football. But thankfully, the quarterback is not Russell Wilson, it's Geno Smith. And that really capped the rest of DK's night, while Alvin Kamara for Washington Fantasy Football Team really broke out with his season-high scoring, which secured Adam his victory. So at this point, in terms of sort of how this looks for playoffs, Choda is sitting at 2-5, having lost 4 straight. He should have Darren Waller and Saquon Barkley coming back in the next week or maybe 2 weeks max for the rest of the season. But Choda, assuming 8-6 cutoff, would now have to go 6-1 the rest of the way to make that 8-6 cutoff line that I'm expecting for playoffs. He faces Ben this week with Lamar on bye. I don't see Choda being able to finish 6-1 to finish out. Now, the question is, What moves will Chota be making as we progress into the second half of the season with him having no first or second round draft pick this year or next? Over to the Washington Fantasy Football Team, he now sits comfortably at 5-2, but Adam does face his toughest stretch of the schedule over the next 4 weeks. He's got Trust the Process this week, a team that he lost to in week 1, and then a gauntlet of runs against the Brady Stewart Dynasty, Cup to Canada, and Bills Mafia. So this week against Trust the Process, in my opinion, is an absolute must-win for Adam, and because if comes out of this with a win, it will give him room for error for the 3 back-to-back-to-back really tough matchups against the other playoff seeding favorites. But if the Trust the Process happens to lose this week to Trust the Process, this really puts the playoff race up in the air, I think. All right, over to matchup 4, Trust the Process at 158 versus Ben Campo at 116. Ben loses what I thought was close to a must-win for him to really give himself a strong shot at the playoffs, where, maybe a game back or stays within relevant sort of margin of error. But, he lost it also against a team that he now gave an opening for playoff hope in Trust the Process. It was a bye week riddled with, injuries and bye weeks for Ben. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey's out, Kareem Hunt is out, and George Kittle is out. But Ben did really just not had any depth in his roster to contend because of all those bye weeks and injuries. So that said, he's got a very winnable matchup against Chota this week, and he does face Bills Mafia and Half Chup after that. I think Ben's still got a chance to go 2-1 the next 3 weeks, which means that he'll be at 5-5 after week 10. And then from there, he should be able to really control his own destiny after that, albeit it'll be challenging as he will be facing all of the playoff favorites after that in Brady Stewart Dynasty, Cup to Canada, and the Washington Fantasy Football Team in week 11, 12, and 13. If he's able to win 2 out of those 3, Ben now has a great shot at playoffs. And I said like 2 weeks ago, his week 14 matchup is against Trust the Process, who may potentially be also in the race with him, depending on how his matchup goes or my matchup goes against the Washington Fantasy Football Team this week. So if he goes 2-1, he's going to be at 7-6, and then all he probably needs to do at that point is beat out Trust the Process in week 14 to sneak into the playoffs. Because that would mean that he probably have knocked down Brady Stewart Dynasty, Cup to Canada, and the Washington Fantasy Football Team, at least 2 of them. All right, so Trust the Process. My team scores back-to-back league high points for this week with solid performances from really all the players who I really need to do well in order to give myself a shot to win week to week. Those players being Kyler Murray, DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, Chris Godwin, Mike Gesicki, and Michael Pittman. I am pretty thin on my bench due to having a lot of prospects on my bench, but all those players have performed admirably for me this season post-acquiring them through trades. And that's really why I'm sitting now at 3-4 with a chance to go in 4-4 against the Washington Fantasy Football Team, where I thought at this point my playoff window would have been completely shut completely. But, looking at sort of the names that I mentioned, Kyler Murray is QB3, and likely he's going to stay in that range, potentially go up. But DeAndre Swift is RB2 for the season and only increasing his workload as he gets healthier. Jonathan Taylor is RB3. And he's RB2 since week 4, since I've acquired him, sitting only behind Derrick Henry. Mike Gesicki out of nowhere is tight end 3. Michael Pittman is now wide receiver 20, and he's having his breakout season. And Javonte Williams is primed to get more touches and get into the RB1 territory, similar to how Miles Sanders was in 2019, how Jonathan Taylor was in 2020, for them to finish out their seasons as rookie running backs for their roster. So in short, the players I've bet on my future are paying off, which is great. And I've also been able to pair sort of together good wins, and now sitting at 3-4. And likely my most important week for the season for me, going up against the Washington Fantasy Football Team this week. An upset victory here puts me at 4-4 and only a game behind the 4th seed, with strength of my roster increasing as the season continues. Like I said, with Javonte Murray expected to increase production, as well as Michael Thomas coming back from injury. I'm calling it right now, boys. If I happen to win and pull off another upset victory over the Washington Fantasy Football Team this week, I am switching my gears and going for playoffs this season. While I'm still obviously going to be holding on to my long-term assets and majority of my draft picks. If not, then I'll just continue to look to be the ripple maker of the season and put pressure on other managers through the trades that I'll be making. Whatever happens, boys, we are halfway into the season, and playoff race is on the verge of potentially lighting on fire after week 8. That does it for my recap. Stay tuned for power rankings coming out later today. See you Thursday, Sunday, and Monday. Peace.